My brother James was part of the orienteering team in high school. For those of you who don't know, orienteering is where they get you to go to the middle of nowhere in teams of 2. They give you a map, a compass, and you must find your way back to each check-in station in order, and it's a race. So my brother and his partner set out and make it through the first few checkpoints, and they're feeling pretty solid. But they don't make it to the next one when they're supposed to. They double-check the map, do some math, and figure out they miscalculated some angle or another, and are now almost off the edge of the map. They recalculate and set off in a new direction. Keep in mind, the line was never intended to be part of the orienteering run. This is unexplored territory, and they came across, well, my brother said, could only be described as a crater, a deep hole in the forest, devoid of trees. And at the center was an ambulance. They are in the woods, miles upon miles from any road, and there is an ambulance that looks like it's decades old, sitting in a crater. So, being teenage boys, they decide to investigate it. My brother said the forest was well on its way to reclaiming the vehicle. It was rusted and covered in plants. It looked out of date, like it was coming from the 40s or some bygone era. In the back, the gurney was still there, but bent in the middle, like something had smashed it. There were brown smears on the walls that could have been rust or dirt or blood. They both got a horrible feeling from the place and took off out of there. My brother thinks he could probably find it again, but flat out refuses to. When you work as a nurse, you see it all. You have to become accustomed to dealing with death, as it's very likely that it will happen on your watch, especially when you work in a care home like I do. I've had lots of people come and go, but one of the creepiest and most common things that happens is talking to relatives that have already passed. When you're about to go, such was the case with a dear friend of mine, Thomas. He had lost his wife many years ago. He was also semi-lucid at times, but for the most part, just babbled. He had dementia. He had no family left. He and his wife had 3 children, but they had all died tragically and horribly during their lives. It pains me, but no parent should have to bury their children, especially not all 3. He was very lonely, which is why I grew attached to him, because he was a kind and sweet old man. He'd tell me stories of his children, of his wife, and of how wonderful they all were. He even got teared up when he told me about how his children had met their end. They had all gotten very sick, and well, they died. It was one of these nights when I was doing my rounds when I just went into his room to wish him good night and told him that it was time for bed. He gave me a smile and said, "I don't think I'm going to sleep tonight." I asked him what he meant. I looked at my watch, and it was already 10:30, which was plenty late for Thomas, who usually slept around 9 o'clock. He gave me another smile. "I'm going to make my exit now. The curtain has fallen." He was a theater actor, you see, and liked using this terminology a lot. We got a hoot out of it, me and the other nurses. I gave him a confused look. "What do you mean? You're on your way out?" He replied, "My kids are here, and my wife. They're here to pick me up. I'm going to take the bus now." I gave him another confused look. What the hell was he talking about? And then it all clicked. He was seeing the ghosts of his family. He gave me another smile when he saw my face dawn with comprehension. "That's right, girlie. It's time for me to go. You scoot along now. I hope I don't see you anytime soon." And he chuckled. I gave a little smile in response. "You silly man," I thought when I walked out of the room. I gave him a little pat on the shoulder and said, "I'll be back in half an hour," and expected him to be asleep. Half an hour later, I'm still finishing up some paperwork and pushing it for 45 minutes before I go check up on him. When I do, I see he's soundly asleep. But just then, I think, I better nip in to check on him to make sure he's okay. I quietly open the door and go in to see if he's still breathing, and he's gone, just like he said. His family was here. As you can imagine, I was pretty creeped out, and just as I was about to leave the room to do what we need to do when someone passes away, do I hear a whisper behind my ear? "Thanks for everything, girlie. I turn around, thinking that he must still be alive, with a huge surge of relief watching over me. When I turn around, he's still dead on the bed and hasn't moved. I'm pretty sure he just wanted to wish me one final goodbye, but that sent chills up my spine for the rest of my shift and left me with a dawning sense of uncomfortableness. It leaves me wondering, though, the mystery of the afterlife, if there even is one, or if that was just his brain playing tricks on him. But why does it happen to so many people? I guess I'll never know, but I suppose one day I'm bound to find out. This story happened when I was pretty young. I'm 22 now and remember it vividly. Growing up, we had a carriage house behind our home that my parents rented out. It was a small one-bedroom apartment. The last man who lived in there gave me the creeps. Apparently, he moved down to Savannah to be close to his mother. He did his laundry in our house, and I always hid from him when he was around. Despite tucking myself away behind shelves and around corners, he always found me. He thought it was funny to ask when I was going to start doing his laundry while looming over me in his dirty vest. Although my parents believed I was just being shy, I knew there was something wrong with this man. He had the unhinged grin and coal-black eyes often associated with the villains in your typical story. It was enough to set off alarm bells in my young mind. In the days leading up to the incident, my parents noticed his behavior was strange. Every morning they heard him throwing up violently from his nights of heavy drinking. He was fired from his job working at the gas electric company in the city for driving recklessly in the company car. One warm night in August, my mother was in the middle of giving me a bath when we heard a huge bang. My mother was immediately furious with my siblings, who she assumed broke something very big and expensive. She ran downstairs, and when she came back, I could tell the situation was far more serious than she'd previously suspected. My mom hoisted me out of the bathtub, wrapped me in a towel, and rushed me downstairs in one smooth motion. When we got down, I realized that all of our windows had blown out, covering our home with shards of glass. My brother was on the phone with my mom, and my sister was already halfway out the door. We all congregated in the front of the house. I remember being very self-conscious that I was in a towel, especially since the neighbors began to congregate outside. It turned out that the man renting the carriage house decided to take his life that night by cutting the gas line and lighting one last cigarette. He knew the line to cut because he worked for the gas company. Normally, the explosion would have obliterated our house as well. However, the termite damage in the carriage house's attic roof caused the roof to blow upwards. If it wasn't damaged, the explosion would have blown the walls outwards, which would have reduced our home to rubble. Who knows what would have happened to my family if that had happened? I don't know anyone who's been thankful for termites. The carriage house tenant didn't die immediately. Neighbors found him walking around the alley bleeding like crazy and laughing maniacally. He passed away in the hospital a few days later. It turns out his mother didn't even know he'd moved back to the city, even though he'd come to be closer to her, or so he says. I didn't know why anyone would choose to end their life, knowing that they could end a whole family's life in the process. Perhaps he didn't know, but I find that hard to believe since he worked for the gas company and specialized in gas. Maybe he was too mentally ill to realize how his actions would impact us. Well, maybe he just didn't care. Regardless, I'm glad I didn't meet him again and hope never to meet anyone like him again. It was early 1984. My true friends and I went to the Wildwood campgrounds on Long Island with my family. It was a safer time back then, so we thought we'd explore the forest. We went up to the cliffs, looking down at the beach and back into the woods, soon becoming forward. So we headed deeper into the woods. They were dense, tangled, and overgrown with weeds and brambles. It was obvious the area was not used or even explored often, as it was so dense. So, we started heading back. Upon our return, we noticed something. A house in the middle of the forest. Most windows were broken, with a sagging roof, wooden and out of place. There was no road leading to it, and no power lines either. It had a mailbox at the front, as well as a brick chimney. We entered the small home, with only a few rooms on the ground level and a gaping hole in the floor showing an exposed basement below. A rotting wooden table, surrounded by peeling wallpaper of roses, sat next to the kitchen. There was a collection of old things, and what I identified as a very small white gas stove, speckled with corrosion. The stairs up and down looked unsafe and rickety. Small animal feces were everywhere, and I don't remember any electrical sockets, lights, or anything of that nature. It must have been from the early 20s or 30s, and the forest had begun to grow around it. The whole place was creepy and smelled like egg or a struck match. What made it really creepy was the hole in the floor. We could only see part of it, as the floor bowed, and we feared getting too close. We could see the basement floor, and there were hundreds of playing cards, but only red ones, hearts and diamonds. I guessed that they were all red. Everything else was really dark. They were piled up in a heaping pile, and why or if anything was underneath them, we will never know because it scared us. For some reason, the dark hole lit only by that spot made the white and red cards seem brighter. They were clean, they were new, and we got the hell out of there. "10 years ago, I started working as a CNA in a care home for the elderly. There was a guy I really got along with named Brian. He was easily my favorite guy to hang around with, and since we were the only guys there, we quickly struck up a very strong friendship. He was a great guy, caring and compassionate, and he looked after all of his patients. He told me a lot of stories about the place, as he had joined straight out of his teens and absolutely loved working there. Stories of spectral figures haunting the hallways, nights where the cameras would flicker and turn off of their own accord, only to find a patient dead in the morning. Spooky stuff, you know. But there was one story that always got to me. The omen of death. Allegedly, some nights, only nights mind you, you would see a big black dog. I had recently finished watching the Harry Potter movies, and it reminded me a lot of the omen given to Harry of the black dog. I asked Brian if he had just taken this from the book, but he swore up and down that this was true. Even other members of the team had seen this before, and this care home was by no means new. It was very likely that it had been around a while, and other members of the staff would have seen it. In any case, the story goes a little bit like this: that when someone is about to die, a black dog will appear and stand near their room. Sometimes in their room, sometimes outside their room, but near their room the black dog will be. When someone sees it, it is as quick to disappear as you saw it, and at the very next day, death is guaranteed. Quite spooky to say the least. We joked around about it, but I am 100% not into the paranormal, or at least wasn't, and didn't give this any credence. As you can expect with any care home, people come and go relatively quickly. We have some residents that stick around a while and are great fun, and it's always very sad when they leave for the last time. One evening, after I'd been working there about 2 years, I hadn't thought of the black dog in a long time. It had popped up in conversations here and there, but I just brushed it away and ignored it. I was visiting Cecil, one of our older residents who had actually been there longer than I had. She was a lovely soul. I just did my routine check, made sure she was all good in bed, and carried on for the night. When I realized I didn't have my phone in my pocket, I thought, oh crap, if I'd left it in Cecil's room and it vibrates, it's gonna wake her up. So I started making my way back. I looked around outside and peered into the room through the glass. It was right there on the chair. I quietly opened the door, hoping not to disturb her, and went around and picked up my phone. I quickly put it on mute and started making my way out. The door opens inwards, and just as I opened the door, I saw a black dog. It was right there in the doorway. It growled at me, and just as quickly as I had seen it, it vanished. I just about pooped my pants, and in my fear, I let go of the door, which shut with a bang. I turned around, assuming that Cecil would wake up at this and deeply needing to apologize, but she didn't stir. Remembering the tale that Brian had told me previously, I just thought I'd check on Cecil to be safe. I approached her bed and listened intently, just to see if she was breathing, but I didn't hear anything. I then established rather quickly that Cecil had expired some moments ago. No doubt Cecil had just been talking to me all fine very shortly ago, so I was quite shocked that she had gone in such an unexpected manner. But that was it. She was out. I saw the black dog only one more time before I quit working there. Another time, I was working the night shift again, and I was just finishing up my rounds. It was approaching 4 a.m. now, and I was very keen to go home. I was just prepping all the necessary paperwork for the handover for the day shift team, and I was just doing a final sweep, just to make sure everyone was still in their bed, when the black dog was again outside a room. This time, it didn't growl. It didn't move. It just gave a little nod of its head in acknowledgement and vanished into the air. My gut dropped, and I knew that this person had met their end. I quietly opened the room, hoping that my eyes were just deceiving me. But when I looked, the person was definitely gone. Their skin was ice cold. They must have been dead a while, I thought, possibly many hours. With a great sigh, I realized that the dog story was true. And the next day, when I had a conversation with Brian, I admitted to him that now I had seen the dog twice. He gave a hearty laugh and said, "Of course it's true." He made a joke saying that he hoped he didn't see it outside his house door anytime soon. We laughed, and in a few months' time I quit, for reasons unrelated to the paranormal, mostly poor staff management. I'll miss Brian though. In any case, it's definitely made me a believer, but I truly hope not to see that black dog anytime again soon. I am a hunter, and I was in the mountain area. It was a chilly December morning, and I hiked in pre-dawn, talking about an hour and a half to go 3 miles off the beaten trail. I got to my nest about half an hour before sunrise and started to settle in. The wind kicked up, and the fog rolled in, thicker than a bowl of oatmeal. Within a few minutes, my visibility was about 5 inches. I'm sitting tight, huddled up against the freezing wind, when I start to hear twigs snapping close to me for no apparent reason. What is normally a rapturous sound, indicative of an eminently successful hunt, sent a frosty chill down my spine. I turned around in my .30, 30 as quietly as I could, and lay flat on my back, tucked against a fallen tree. The rustling was moving closer through the fog, but I couldn't see anything. The sun was starting to peek over the mountains to the east, and visibility was starting to increase. The rustling of twigs and leaves was sporadic, sometimes directly in front of me, sometimes behind or beside me. I remember laying the rifle across my chest, thinking to myself how silly it is to react like such a coward. I reasoned with myself that bears and mountain lions are a rarity where I was, so I had likely stumbled into a herd of whitetails that had bedded down and decided to sit up. The rustling stopped immediately. As it was fully dawn by now, I was looking through the fog for the outline of my prey, which I had assured myself was literally around me. It wasn't. Seemingly, nothing was. By now, the fog had faded away, and it was apparent to me that I was alone in those woods. I hunted all that day without seeing as much as a squirrel. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, after fighting the wind and an abnormally cold day and not wanting to hike out by flashlight, I decided it was time to start back to the truck. Walking out of those woods was the most uneasy I had ever felt. Lawfully, once you make your way back to the trail, you're supposed to clear the chamber of your rifle, but not that day. What is normally a stroll through the woods, I undertook with the seriousness of an animal being stalked. I would walk, then stop and listen, and I never heard or saw anything during my retreat, but I could feel eyes on me. I was about 100 feet away from my truck when I rounded the last corner and saw, hanging at eye level from a tree by a noose, a stuffed bear in a blaze orange jacket. I am a giant, broad-shouldered outdoorsman, but that one shook me up something fierce. I worked the night shift at a local McDonald's. I had to fill in for my friend Kiara, who called in sick this night. It was probably one of the most terrifying nights I have ever worked. It was dead around 11 p.m., as I was asked by the manager to sweep the floors until a customer came in. One customer came in, and he looked a bit rough. He had a long, rusty beard, glasses, sandals, and clothes that had stains on them. I go over to the register and say, "Hello? Can I get you anything?" "Yeah, I'll have a large coffee, please," he replies. I take his order, give him his coffee, and tell him, "Have a wonderful night, sir." He smiles. I resume sweeping the floor again as I see this man sitting a bit close to where I could be sweeping, which is usually under the tables and just around the floors. When I reach his table, he says, "You're very beautiful. Thank you so much," I say with a smile. "Can I give you a ride home when you get off work?" he asks. "Oh no, thank you. I have a ride home," I reply. He becomes the opposite of the nice man that I took the order from to just pure rude. "What's your schedule?" "I'm not allowed to give out that information, sorry," I say. He takes his coffee and goes back outside. The next night after that, Kiara and I worked together, and my other guy friend Jack. I told Kiara about the guy from the night before, and she gave me a weird facial expression. Jack comes over and says, "Monica, is everything okay?" I tell him about the guy from the night before, and he gave me a look of terror. What he said sent chills running down my spine. "The man called the restaurant earlier and asked about you," he says. My blood ran cold as I saw the same man walk back in. Kiara's face went pale, and Jack's stomach dropped. My stomach turned in knots, and I say, "Hello, can I get you anything tonight?" "No, but can I take you home?" the man asks. Jack steps out and says, "No, she ain't going anywhere with you. Get out before I call the cops." The manager got pissed off at Jack for leaving his position at the drive-thru window while Kiara was frying burgers, and Jack agreed to switch positions with me until the morning crew came in. The manager asked me to take the trash outside. I nervously said, "Okay." Jack, on the other hand, was furious that the manager asked me to do it. Jack was nice enough to do it for me. I stayed inside, and Jack comes in and pulls me into the janitor's closet. He says, "That guy was waiting for you in his truck with 5 other big guys in there." I felt sick to my stomach when he said that. Jack informs the manager, and like the asshole that she was, she says, "He's not gonna hurt anyone. He's harmless. Get back to work." The next morning, me and Jack worked together, and my coworker Taylor informs me that the man has come back and told her my schedule, and that he will wait for me to come back. Today, I was sick of it until I saw him come in. Jack, being the good friend that he was, told him to get out of the restaurant and never return, or else he'd call the cops. Jack lost his job because of this, but to me, he was just looking out for me. I cried when Jack lost his job because I knew Kiara would be working alone without anyone else to protect us, but I never saw the man again after that. I quit my job at McDonald's, and so did Kiara. Me, Jack, and Kiara now live in the same apartment building and work at a grocery store. I don't know what could have happened to me if I took out the trash that night and not Jack. I'm just happy I never saw that creep again. One night I was solo camping in a remote lake above a small town. You're not allowed to come near the lake, so I hiked up a little ways onto the hillside and set up underneath the camouflage tarp. It must have been around midnight. I was all snuggled in my hammock when I heard laughing and yelling in the distance. I peeked out from behind my tarp to see what looked like a handful of college-age dudes drinking, fishing, and having a good time. Okay, whatever. I tried to sleep anyway. I drifted in and out for about an hour, but I was kept from sleeping by an extremely loud bird in the tree next to me that just kept hooting and screeching. Eventually, I picked up a large branch and swung it at the tree to shut it up. Suddenly, the Dude brothers went silent. I could tell that they froze, and they were looking intently in my direction, trying to find the source of the noise. I crawled back into my sleeping bag and tried to sleep, but the bird started again. I decided I needed to find some pine cones or something to throw at it to scare it away. So I got out of my sleeping bag, moved outside the tarp, and started looking on the ground. I decided to try the branch again and slammed it as hard as I could to the tree trunk, and the sound rang out loudly. They all looked over to see a pale, naked figure hunched over in the tree line, staring at them. I immediately scrambled on all fours under my tarp. Then it must have looked like some horrible pale creature disappeared into the underbrush after having been caught observing them. They went silent, had a muffled, terrified conversation, and packed up and left. I slept soundly for the rest of the night, but those guys must have been pretty freaked out. When I was 18, me and my friends took a road trip about 7 hours or so down to Apalachicola Forest near Tallahassee, Florida. We were going to do a little car camping, drinking a few ice-cold native lights. 18-year-old stuff. As we didn't want to be bothered by any park rangers, we drove way deep into the woods. We got there, set up camp, and had sent in 80 lights. Me and a guy decided to do a little exploring, so we walked about 100 yards from our site back to the main road, so another path directly across from us, and started walking. Immediately, we started seeing signs that someone had been living there for a while. Big bags of trash, stuff like that. I should have seen a huge red flag and turned around, but, I'm 18 and nothing can hurt me. So we get to this campsite of an older white guy living out of his van, clotheslines strung up, and a big gorgeous dog, which I think was a golden retriever. We tried to back out, but he sees us and starts up a conversation. He's friendly enough and asks us where we're from, and he tells us some cool spots to check out. We ended up chatting to him for about 10 minutes, and then we went on our way. I kept thinking how odd it was that he gave directions and steps, not yards or miles. The guy seemed to be off balance, not stumbling drunk, but like he was walking on a balance beam, swaying side to side. Oh, and he was super excited to talk about national parks and forests and where we were from. So we went back to our tents. Fast forward 2 months. The same buddy calls me late at night and tells me to turn on the TV to the news. I obliged, and I see an old dude with a van. You see where this is heading? But I didn't, so I get pissed at my friend for waking me, and he insists that I should watch. And when I see the golden retriever, it all clicks. The man's name was Gary Michael Hilton, convicted of at least 4 murders. He kidnapped and murdered a girl on Blood Mountain, Georgia, an older couple in Pisgah, North Carolina, and a girl in Apalachicola at the campsite not long after we left. Yes, the very same places he had been talking to us about. Obviously, we called the cops, and they put us in touch with the FBI. We get flown down to take investigators to the campsite, point out every spot we saw, and tell them exactly what he told us, and show them the places he described to us. I didn't find out until after the trial, but apparently they found what appeared to be partially destroyed human finger bones in an area near the site, and I had to be flown down again to testify.